So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first in our new 2024 season of Talking Towns, brought to you by UCD's Centre for Irish Towns Research Group. Just a reminder, as you've probably become aware, the session is being recorded, and the session will be uploaded shortly to the Centre for Irish Towns YouTube channel. Just for any latecomers, if I could ask you to mute your calls while we're progressing. So my name is Stephen Wall. I'm a architect and researcher currently carrying out a PhD in the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy in UCD on the low carbon transition of Irish towns and specifically looking at the role of the new European Bauhaus that can play in this transition. So I'll be chairing today's webinar. Just a little background on the Centre for Irish Towns. The centre is intended to build a network of people interested in Irish towns and generate conversations about the challenges facing towns and the role of research and policy in addressing them. These Talking Town webinars are one mechanism that we have for doing this. The series is curated this year by myself and Dr. Anna Skura, who you should be able to see on screen there, as Anna is from the Centre for Irish Towns Working Group and is currently project manager of the Vacancy Map Ireland project. So we will have 3 webinars this year in spring and 3 more in autumn, and details will be released in advance. You might like to mark your diaries for the 2 other sessions in spring. That is the 18th of April, for which will deal with urban heritage, and the 9th of May, which will deal with the town centre first policy. So they should be very interesting sessions. All previous sessions and this one, once it's completed, will be available on the Centre for Irish Towns YouTube channel. So today we are focusing on the Housing Unlocked initiative. Now, this initiative is a joint venture between the Irish Architecture Foundation and the Housing Agency. The initiative organised an ideas competition in 2022, which sought proposals from architect-led teams to create ideas intended to unlock the housing potential in towns, villages, cities and communities across the country, calling for evidence-based solutions addressing quality, density, environmental performance, social inclusion and vacancy. The competition held in 2022 with an exhibition of selected ideas taking place from late 2022 to early 2023 in the former Science Gallery in Trinity College Dublin. So I myself worked on one of the selected projects alongside my colleague Stephen Foley of SFA 42 Architects and his team in a project that looked at unlocking the potential for muse development to increase housing supply in established residential areas. And if you attended the exhibition, you'll remember our extremely witty title, Start Spreading the Muse. So today we have 3 speakers who are uniquely positioned to shed light on the initiative and how it has been progressing. These are Nathalie Weadick, currently lecturing in UCD and former director of the Irish Architecture Foundation. Cormac Murray of O'Mahony Pike Architects, who was part of the EcoQ project at the Housing Unlocked exhibition. And finally, Emmet Walsh of EWA Architects, who developed the Working Home project for the competition and exhibition. So each of our speakers will have about 10 minutes each to address, to talk to us, and we will have then a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions or comments for the contributors, you can pop them in the chat, and if you can, remember to make it clear in the comment who the comment is aimed at, and that will be very helpful for us. And we will have a Q&A at the conclusion. So first off, we have Nathalie. Nathalie Weadick is a curator of architecture, art and spatial practice based in Dublin. She was the director of the Irish Architecture Foundation from 2007 to 2023. Previously, she was deputy director at the Architecture Foundation in London and director of the Butler Gallery in Kilkenny. Currently, Nathalie is tutoring in the UCD School of Architecture and lecturing at the School of History of Art and Cultural Policy while defending her PhD on curating. So Nathalie will give us some of the background and progress of the Housing Unlocked competition. So Nathalie, if you would like to take it away, I'll hand over to you.
Cool. Thank you, Stephen. Let me just try and share. Hang on 2 seconds. Excuse me, 2 seconds. Sorry. Do you see a full screen there, guys? You do. Okay. I just want to do presenter notes. 2 seconds. Okay, cool. Ready to go. Thanks, Stephen. And can I just say, when you invited me to do this, I was actually quite touched because you said in your email that you wanted to start your series with revisiting Housing Unlocked, because it was a project quite dear to you. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet, because I haven't really had the opportunity since I left the IF to actually talk about it and discuss it and unpack it. And so this is just a huge privilege for me to be in this call, and to be sharing this to your network and audience. So thank you so much to the Centre for Irish Towns and to yourself and everybody here. So I've titled my talk the sweet spot, where the public practice and policy intersect. And just for context, as Stephen said, I'm no longer with the IEF. I'm studying, or not studying, I'm defending my PhD. But like, part of defending my PhD has actually sort of put into context about what I mean by the sweet point. And I've learned that striving for this point of intersection, as I call the sweet point, the intersection where practice, or policy and public intersect, is one common denominator that goes through all of my practice, whether it was at the Irish Architecture Foundation, or before that at the Architecture Foundation in London, or even before that in the Butler Gallery. So the compulsion I have as a curator, I suppose, and the duty of care that I accept as a director of publicly funded institutions, actually um, compels me to create contextually rich, original and meaningful encounters between creative practitioners. And in this case, we're talking about architects for Housing Unlocked. So between creative practitioners and between diversified participants, and by that I mean the public, of different ages, backgrounds and interests, and visionary decision makers, and by that I mean people in charge of policy. And I call this um, point of intersection the three Ps, and it's really a convergence of these three cohorts. It becomes the sweet spot. This is the space. This space can be challenging, confronting, but also very generous and open. And for me, Housing Unlocked was the epitome of this convergence. It is something that I always strive to achieve. Um, in everything I do. And sometimes it's not always possible because there are external pressures and forces, and contexts that just make it not possible. But I would say that for Housing Unlocked, it was in fact the moment that I just realized that the sweet point is possible. And that's something that I've been working on for, I would say, about 15 or 20 years to try and achieve. So um, it was a good for me. It was a great project to end on when just before I left the IF. So just to explain what I mean by the sweet spot, it's a place of empathy and respect for each other's disciplines. There are no hierarchies. It's a space where perspectives can be challenged. Um, it's a place of great agency and potential, obviously, and where experience, knowledge, and learning are exchanged. Um, and the spot when it's revealed, or another way of saying it, I suppose, Housing Unlocked, if Housing Unlocked is the epitome of that moment, what you see and what it reveals is the transformative power of architecture. What it reveals is fresh thinking and innovative ideas, and it's presented to us as a platform for dialogue and a platform where everybody is invited. I would say that Housing Unlocked shifted narratives, mindsets, and inspired change. It was significant in its size and scale and ambition, and it actually took 4 years from concept to realization for me. But still, it's still, I see it, even though the project is over physically as a physical exhibition, I still see it as a starting point, obviously, for this type of work and these types of conversations. Um, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the team actually that were involved in this project in the IF, particularly Felix, and Blóhín and Alba, Felicity, Bernadine, Karen, and Vanessa. I just want to say that because I haven't seen you guys for a long time, and I hope I know Felix is on this call, but it's very much it's very much a group effort. So um, the aim is simple, and ambitious, and that was to stimulate conversation, challenge current thinking, and push boundaries, and produce solutions freely, creatively, and pragmatically. Pragmatically was important because we had to have some tangible questions and conversations and real life situations to actually hold on to in the project. We wanted to maximise the ingenuity and talent of architectural practice in Ireland, which was really, really, really important, and uncover the potential that they demonstrate and the real possibilities to the public and policy makers. And that was really, really key central force behind the strategic thinking behind this project. Just very quickly about the process. You, it, the process started, the pre-stage, as I call it, the idea and the strategy. The strategy for me is that hoping to reach that point of intersection, and how I might do that, and the vision for the whole exhibition, and to create sort of an ecology of supporters around it. Something like this cannot happen in a vacuum. Before Housing Unlocked, the IEF tried and attempted to levels of success to talk about housing, and it was always a very difficult conversation because it's a very urgent and important topic. And we were trying to figure out a way to do it that would sort of ignite ideas and come at it from a very positive perspective. And that was always there from the very, very beginning. And actually, the stage of where you and Stephen was talking about, it's at the partnership with the housing agency was really key to actually start the project moving in the real world. It was the green light, and that partnership was really important, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And just as well as the IF team and the housing agency team, we had a whole team of advisors. So we set up a very robust structure behind the scenes, the unseen structure behind the scenes, in order to ensure we got that content. We had a very rigorous process in the brief writing, in constructing the delivery team, the advisory team. Actually, I'm in Philip Crow's office. He was on the advisory team, and then, how to make the competition work. How do you promote it? What jury do you select? How does that process work? And then you move into the stage of the selected 8, and then the production of the work and working with the architect groups, the exhibition opening, the press, all of these things that go around it. And then for me is where the sort of the magic happens, and that's where the practice, public and policy activation happens, is when the doors open and the exhibition runs. And that moment of the exhibition becoming public is literally when it becomes alive. And that point of process, from the idea up to the point of the eve of the exhibition, is one stage for me as a curator, and then the becoming public and it becoming something in public is absolutely the second stage of equal importance, if not more important. And then there's the IF have published a book recently, which is available, which covers all of the discussions, becomes the legacy piece, the piece that still exists after the exhibition, which is seen in my mind as something that's quite performative, and the aftermath, it continues. And I know that it is continuing as a topic for discussion, particularly with the relationship between the IEF and the housing agency. So even post-exhibition, our partners in the housing agency endeavour to capitalise on the impact of the initiative by continuing the conversations with architects and the people in the Department of Housing. They created their own catalogue called Making It Happen, and they disseminated this to government. And the title of this, Making It Happen, really illustrates their intentions, their wonderful intentions. And I would like to pause to just to acknowledge Noelle Sweeney from the housing agency, and like for the whole process from when they signed up at stage 1, we were joined at the hip, and her team, and the feeling and presence of this support as a partner, not as a funder but as a partner, was very empowering. The housing agency brings a huge amount of expertise to this project, of which the IEF didn't possess. We are that public facing organisation. We know how to communicate quite successfully and to bring architecture out into other realms, but it was an absolute partnership from the get-go, and it was wonderfully enriching, and there was learning from all sides, and it wouldn't have happened without them. So I just want to acknowledge that. I just, in terms of the tone and where that came from, I mean, very fortuitously around the time when we were drafting the brief, or I was drafting the brief to bring to the team of advisors, we had just done we were just doing this event in the pandemic time on COVID at the New Next event. And it was something that Jean-Philippe said, that housing is the most beautiful challenge for architecture and the architect. And I just thought like that became the mantra for the program, and became the kind of impetus behind how we would write the brief and how we would communicate this whole project. And so it's really left an impression, and a tone and a register for the Housing Unlocked initiative for me. Being radically public, yeah, look, that's literally so important to the work that I did in the IEF, and still remains important to me. And the location in the former Science Gallery was key to this. I just knew that trying to find the right location, was key. I didn't want this exhibition to be in a sort of a leftover space, meaning in a lobby or in a sort of a meal while use space. I really wanted this to be in a very, very, very prominent space. And the choice, or the search for the venue partner, really, really added to the necessity for this project to be radically public. And not just the venue, it's also the process of what into and inviting the public through the doors and what we did. And I'll talk a bit about that as well. So like, I believe that exhibitions are not just a medium for public display, but they are also a tool to incite action, provocation. And Housing Locked was no different. This was an expression. This was expressed in the engagement program. I think we had something like over 60 events delivered by Blohin, curator of learning in the IF. And this program was of equal importance to the actual objects in the gallery for the IF. You know, the setup of the living room space and using that. I mean, 60 events over 3 or 4 months was incredible achievement, and all types of people involved in those events. I was going to do a kind of a count of like how many people were part of this whole process, and it was a lot. It was actually a lot, not just delivering stuff, but just throughout the whole project. And this was very key way back in the initial stage of the strategy. um, I'll just move on. Actually, I've just looked at the time. Human interaction key. And I just love taking these candid shots of people interacting with the exhibition. The engagement program is programmed interaction, but the human interaction of people, the strategy of designing, the making of every architect team putting forward a question which we would stick on the wall, and that is the invitation to the public. If we're talking about being radically public, to actually engage in the work, all strategic thinking about how these pieces communicate. And then moving on to what I call the innovators, or the provocations. I always thought of these pieces as provocations. This is the list of the 8 projects that were in the show. And I'm just going to quickly just bring you on a run around. How long do I have, Stephen? This will take about 3 minutes.
That's okay, Natalie. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so in the gallery space, these installations, if you remember, ranged from one-to-one models, from showing a street shop front could be transformed to live work space, like Emmet's work, to whole community scale displays, exploring the vast untapped potential in vacant spaces in Irish towns. They involve film projections, maps, 3D printed modules, newspapers, renderings, architectural models, watercolor paper, graphic displays, clipboard, modular fabricated drywall, all of these things, reimagined banking halls, churches, and a plywood canopy. I mean, it was just like a cacophony of it was like a sort of a playground, but a very serious playground discussing a very urgent matter. And just very quickly, I'm just literally scooting through these. This is for people here in the audience who didn't get to see the show, but like 33 Churches by David Lawless and Sophie Kelleher. And the name comes from the 33 churches identified in the Archdiocese of Dublin, submission to the draft Dublin City Council Development Plan in 2022-2028. Their submission was about their installation really focused on these churches, and they identified them as potential for rezoning of future residential use, and a really, really provocative, engaging presentation. Bank of Ireland's, this was by Tom Cookson Building Society by Tom Cookson and Sarah Carroll, and this is very much based around the idea of unused, the regional branches that 103 or something regional branches that shut down, and these could be again fundamentally with some physical altering of the space, and could be turned into places where we could in fact think about them as opportunities for residential use. um, JFOC's installation, this really refreshed the idea of suburban development, making elements of the system that work, or working, or taking, sorry, elements of the systems that work and incorporating newer ideas into these challenging elements that don't quite work and making tweaks. But it was very much about delivery, affordability, and placemaking. And their installation was this one-to-one construction. They used I suppose, the actual one-to-one physical space of the residential space and incorporated that into their exhibition. And they collaborated with Fast House Construction and Common Ground Community-led Designing, Lagan Homes, etc. And they were showing that this is really possible to work in this way. The model housing that a team from UCD pulled together, Elith, Marcus and Will and Bevan and Joe and Alan and Finola all came together, and they focused this very much on the liberties, but this actually could be, scaled. This actually is the feel, or the sort of thought process and the objectives behind this project, which it could easily be applied, in any uh, urban setting, either in a town or suburban city edge, and they demonstrate how new opportunities may be found for the habitation and rich living environments within the urban grain of Irish towns and cities. And it's just a great project and a great resource for people who are thinking this way. And the and then you have what McCullum Mulvin did. I mean, they gave us a hundred ideas, which was wonderful. And in a sense, by giving, a lot of the conversations we had around these spaces were with people who work in policy, with people who work in the Department of Housing, and by presenting something as kind of these small bite-size um, changes, and these ideas kind of makes it possible to believe that these can happen. And this particular piece was a never-ending conversation starter and sort of mindset changer, because of the way the McCullum Mulvin achieved the subject matter and the presentation. And then, start spreading the muse. Stephen, you're very familiar with this project. Again, this was like a wonderful installation, done in a way of really looking at unlocking the potential of suburban laneways, and um, but in a way that was streamlining the process, creating new residential units. And it was just a really, really great project in collaboration between you and Stephen Foley. And it was, people still talk about it today, actually, even in when I'm in studio here in UCD. Um, and then I'm not going to talk about these because the guys are up next to talk about these, but I'll just move swiftly on again, looking at new ways of thinking about, modular living, with the OMP piece, and alternative housing model, and all of, looking at issues of density and supply, in that presentation of how fast can we deliver low carbon homes. Even that question is quite provocative. All these questions, can vacant shops be used for housing, what Emmet did? I mean, they're just like, yeah, okay, let's have a look at that, because people go, no, I don't know, you live above the shop, don't you? Why would you want to live in the shop? It just, these were the conversation starters that I heard as I walked through the science gallery. And then, you can see from all the amount of logos here that there was a full ecology of support needed to get this project, with our main partners, the housing agency, but we also had support from the Department of Housing. We had support from the LDA, the New European Bauhaus, backing our Trinity College Dublin. I mean, I just, to think about the province who gave us that space, I can't imagine. I don't know. God, we were so lucky and opportunistic. Actually, if this had gone in any other space in Dublin, I don't think, we would have had that. that feeling of being radically public, which is something that I love to think that this show was. So, you know, Housing Unlocked was not merely an exhibition, I think, but rather an exercise in changing narratives, for opening up generous discussions on the future of the built environment and how it should serve people. Housing Locked was charged with a sense of urgency. So that sense of urgency was really like running through this whole project, kind of like a sort of electricity, and combined, but it was very much combined with optimism and innovation, and that was really important, which was reinforced by the confluence of ideas from the architect teams who came together, contribute to the challenge. The impact of Housing Unlocked remains to be seen, and this, you know, this conversation we're having today is a kind of part of that ongoing continuation of the initiative. But I have no doubt that the creative energy that's been expended by the architects and their teams, and the encounters with the public and the community groups and the intensive discussions ongoing with policymakers, I think I'm absolutely certain that we have and will strike a chord for progress. And as I said at my first slide, it was only the start, really, you know. So um, that's my presentation, Stephen, to start off this conversation.
Thanks, Natalie. That's a very nice, comprehensive overview of the competition and its origins and proceedings. So really appreciate that. And thanks again to you and your team at the IAF for the mammoth amount of work involved in getting this together and carrying it out. And I see Felix is on the call as well. And also to Noel Sweeney and the Housing Agency who also were heavily involved. So we'll move on, and now we'll look at two of those projects in detail. The first is the EcoCube project, and to discuss this, we have Cormac Murray. Cormac is an architect at O'Mahony Pike, and Cormac and his team developed the EcoCube project, exploring the potential for modular living to deliver sustainable housing. Cormac is, as well as being an architect, a lecturer in TU Dublin and editor at Type. So, Cormac, I'll hand over to you if you'd like to share your slides.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Okay, so I don't know if everybody can see this yet, but thanks very much, Stephen, for the invitation to talk at today's event, and also we're delighted to kind of contribute to the ongoing research and presentations that the Centre for Irish Towns are doing. And also, Nathalie, we have to extend our thanks to you as well for bringing us all together on this journey. And it's actually really nice to reflect on it now that the dust has settled a bit. And certainly we are finding that it really only was the beginning, like in terms of conversations that have been happening. And I know from speaking to other exhibitors, it's the same. Each project, each exhibit, if you like, has kind of taken on its own life since the exhibition, which really was the aim. It's very reassuring to see that happen. So I'll just try. Yeah. So just to introduce the team, I'm delighted. I'm joined here actually by Derek Murphy, director at O'Mahony Pike Architects, who has quite a busy schedule. So it's great that he can contribute to the talk today. But we also had a kind of varied team within O'Mahony Pike at kind of director level, associate director, associate, and architecture level, which really meant that we brought kind of a multitude of perspectives to the project, I suppose. And also kind of experience all across the housing market, whether it's in our Dublin office or in our Cork office, and experience, I suppose, at the kind of concept stage, which is predominantly the area I would work in, but then also like at the sort of delivery end of things and actually constructability and those conversations that we're having with builders on sites and developers, etc. And then we also collaborated with KSN, who provided kind of quantity surveying input onto the proposal, because I suppose we were keen that this is a real proposal that actually was tested, if you like, to a degree. And then O'Connor, Sutton Cronin, OCSE provided mechanical, electrical and structural engineers. And then a special mention as well to presentation models, Katie Galvin, as well as Podium constructed our kind of OSB exhibit. They really were fundamental, I suppose, in developing the idea into what became the exhibit in terms of actually something we probably wouldn't have been able to imagine ourselves, and they had quite a lot of input into how we 3D printed a lot of the modules. We'll end on an image of the exhibit for those who haven't seen it. So, and Derek, you can jump in at any point here, because really, just to say, to be clear about this, it did come from the brain of Derek at a very early stage, working out this sort of module for how we could actually deliver a new model of a sustainable housing. But I think this diagram is one of the ones that most clearly describes the simplicity of the idea, which becomes quite complicated as we develop through it and go through iterations. But ultimately, it looks at a site that's 8 by 8 meters by 18.2 meters or 160 square meters. And the idea being that on day one, we could look at a sort of pre-serviced site, and that there would be all the sort of mechanical electrical plant that you need in this sort of little energy hub that we call it. And then this system of screw pile foundations on a grid, which can kind of take any multitude of these modular components and develop over the future. And I suppose what's important to say is that we were trying to think of a housing system that's not static, that actually changes and evolves over time. The idea being that it's actually kind of a foot in the door for a lot of people on the housing market, in terms of they might not be able to build a 4-bed home, but they could actually afford to build this 1-bed to start with. And over time, they know that there's a system in place that they can actually add to this, growing it to so this is the 1-bed version here, but then growing it to a 2-bed, 3-bed, and then there was iterations that were 4-bed as well. So really, it's the idea behind it is using a volumetric modular system. So these are these sort of rectangular containers, and they're all sized on the same grid, and they're 8 by 8 by 4.4, so they're rectangular shaped. I suppose if going back to the kind of title of the exhibition, Housing Unlocked, like what this was unlocking for us really was that, as opposed to just a traditional housing development, and we'll look at some examples of that, when you start to stack and rotate these modules in these sort of iterations, it meant that we could actually get on a similar plot size, grow up to a 4-bed house, but also that it's offering something unique and different, I suppose, in terms of a sort of a house typology that might be new and exciting for people to live in. And then also that no two houses would necessarily be the same. So there's quite a lot of flexibility within that. So, I mean, when Derek first kind of presented the idea in-house to us, really, you were talking about a sample site in Coolock, I believe, there was 1 hectare. And this is sort of what we're looking at a lot on the urban design level, and people like John O'Mahony have done quite a lot of presentations on as well, which is sort of like this typical sort of suburban 1950s to 1980s development of the house with private rear garden in areas like Coolock, Crumlin, Drimnagh, all throughout the kind of outer ring of Dublin City. And then and that gives you a typology, I suppose, which is, you arrive at a 4-bed house at a minimum with quite a large back garden, and it's static, and it can only ever be that 1 iteration. So we looked at the typical plot size, I suppose, of 24 meters by 6.5 meters, and looking at the same sort of area, but just slightly more squat, was kind of our test site that we sort of developed up this idea on. Okay, and I think it's fair to say, Derek, there's quite a few different iterations within this of potential sort of layouts that you can generate. But I suppose the two, particularly for the exhibition, the two that we kind of communicated, I think, and developed up were either a communal courtyard module, which takes up about half a hectare, or a back-to-back housing module like this. And we'll actually have 3D views in a few minutes, just kind of explaining that. But really, it shows that if you purely were interested in the numbers, if there's anyone from a planning background here, what would have been a site taking 36 dwellings per hectare can actually be scaled up to 50 dwellings per hectare, or even 66 dwellings per hectare is possible there. And that's what those two modules that I suppose that we developed up look like. So on the left, you can see there's this communal courtyard model, and it's 50 dwellings per hectare. What you're looking at there is about 25 different houses arranged around a communal courtyard. And I suppose when we were researching the idea of like modular living and the proposal around it, what becomes really important is the placemaking aspect, and really that people kind of can think of this as a temporal or a short-term or a quick solution. but we're talking about it as actually just a really highly engineered, really well constructed and adaptable idea, but ultimately it won't work unless you have really good placemaking and really good landscaping around it, and really appropriate facilities for people in terms of communal gardens, potentially for community space. It's all just working within the same framework, but we can't, I suppose, just drop this on any one site, and expect it to work. That really the important aspect is how this is set up on day one, I suppose, to allow it to grow in future. And then similarly on the back to back version there, I think is that about 25 in each?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose just that Cormac in that on courtyard model. So the shift in density here, almost doubling in density in the traditional 1950s or 60s kind of format. But the planning and community gain on that is actually with smaller gardens, and we all kind of used to our long traditional gardens, which is kind of the last thing people can afford to do up and get enjoyment out of them, and normally very exposed and overlooked, is by making more compact housing models where there's upper terraces, smaller courtyard gardens, much more meaningful in terms of the outdoor space being connected to the inside, and getting a variety of different, more compact outdoor spaces. So when you have that within the housing models, means you can also then give back to the neighbourhood or community by having a shared courtyard space, in this case with the one on the left. So these particular housing can access that directly from the rear of their house through either a room or through a wall, and that space then becomes a shared space for the community, while still gaining an increase in supply of housing overall, much more efficient use of land or resource, and more of a sustainable density moving forward.
Yeah, so I'll keep moving on, but we can always answer any questions to come back, just because we're against time. And so this illustrates that proposal of what is the potential of this communal space, and how we really see that as being a sort of anchor or fundamental piece of the picture, really, that we're not just talking about square footage of the modules that are brought in, but really actually, as Derek said, the variety that we can offer in terms of outdoor space and communal space. And as we developed this for the exhibition, we started to kind of play with these modules, and the idea being that we would sort of work out a series of typical house types, and then actually 3D print another number of them, and allow people to sort of interact with the exhibition, and rather being a sort of a lecture, just purely communicating, but there's more of actually an engagement between people who interact with it. So the color coding system that's there really just reflects whether on the left, the red kind of represents a sort of a living unit, the yellow is kind of a flexible one, and the green is one that's for sleeping, and kind of get into what each one does. And I suppose also we have a lot of experience on apartments and houses, so we had to make sure that these actually would be spaces that were livable as well, responding to housing standards. But you can see there really that what starts to happen in that, if you look at the bottom of this image there, step one is how these might start, and then as it goes up, then they grow from 1 bed bottom to 2 bed to 3 bed, and potentially even to a 4 bed within the same space. And I think actually the idea of these have intensive green roofs on them as well. So actually, as you go up and as you circulate vertically, you're actually gaining back more outdoor space, balcony space, potential of that. So you're actually, rather than thinking that you're losing your back garden, you're actually getting this sort of vertical garden, which in itself is quite interesting, we think.
So these were the 4 options we selected. People could play with. Nathalie mentioned the play area of the exhibition.
Yeah.
So we had a giant Lego set, I'm sure Cormac will touch on, where these 3D printed modules were done, and actually one of my joyful moments was seeing a bunch of kids kind of, left by their parents, and this was kind of like a guidebook we gave them to kind of just spark their creativity to start off with a number of combinations, but then as looking at them, they kind of came up with their own, and all sorts of kind of crazy stuff was happening. But in total, we kind of worked out there was 15 different typologies of housing plausible in this, and as I say, people think about modular and not giving choice. And we didn't want a sense of one size fits all. So there is big part of this is giving choice to people and the way they can assemble their homes, and that could then also animate the street and the overall neighbourhood development And again, as Cormac says, it can change over time as people add or take away modules.
Yeah. And then that this is kind of just an image of like when Derek says 15 typologies, and each one of those typologies could be 4 different levels of houses. So I think when I counted, I got 59 that we did for the exhibition. And that was when we there was a point where we had to restrain ourselves from designing anymore, because, you know, it was kind of like a Rubik's Cube, a bit of a challenge of trying to figure out what were the potential. We picked the 15 best, I think, that we found had the most interesting qualities. And then I suppose, yeah, look, we're kind of thinking of this from the homeowner side, the client side, if you like, and really one of the key recommendations we got out of it was that there would be sort of this framework to be in place, and then there'd be kind of guidance or sort of design guidance around how they might actually be then adapted. And really what we're always trying to do is give people choice. So ultimately, you know, people would think that, you know, one module doesn't have to look the exact same as another, even though it's sized in the same way. So there's kind of a variety of finishes and materials possible within this structure. And just some images then of a version of how we see it. And I suppose, you know, trying to expand from that idea of just prefabrication as being something quite monotonous and sort of quite banal, that really, you know, we're trying to explore here and trying to really demonstrate the sort of streetscape that's possible, and even like the effect of having that one constant element, which is the sort of, I'm not sure if people can see my cursor, but the energy pod that's there. It does actually add to sort of this regularity of streetscape, and then all these other things are happening beyond that, and, you know, they'll change over time. It's people could also scale down with module trading as well as scale up, which is important to say. And looking at then finishes of the inside, and again, in every image you're getting dual aspect, and you're also getting quite close to external spaces. So this idea of, you know, this is something people really value now, particularly because it moves well working from home. You want to have access to your own garden, and you'll have it across multiple levels within this, and then potential for some of the external spaces there. These are some of the upper level spaces that we looked at as well. And
just to say in the upper levels, as you start to redistribute, you know, traditional gardens vertically between courtyards and roof terraces, we often thought about, you'll always communicate across the fence in the front of your house, you know, with your neighbour, and talk as you're putting out the bins. We felt there could be another layer of communication at the back of these developments as such, at the upper levels between terraces and roof gardens, so where neighbours can talk down or across to people. So it's about kind of animating those sequence of tight-knit spaces internally as well, and vertically, and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, I mean, you'd see that in historic courtyards and apartment buildings in Paris. Like, so it's something that exists, you know, it's technology that's quite successful, fosters a sense of community. So we're trying to, you know, figure out a model for that. And yeah, we're just coming to the end now. This is a very condensed version, I suppose, of what we have. But really kind of this idea of, like, on year one, it might kind of begin with one of those common courtyard would look like this. And over time, more people are starting to buy in, and, you know, you're kind of building, and these are growing, more facilities get added. And then, you know, again, we're just thinking this is, I like the word ecosystem, because it can contract and expand as well, like, rather than just be a static thing that grows over time. And then, of course, we did look at the sort of sustainability of the deliverable. We wanted to be as low carbon as possible, and obviously one of the huge aspects that the modular system offered us was that, you know, we could actually get these as highly engineered, highly performing, and they're also demountable, so like they can adapt to future conditions as well. And we won't get into the brass tacks here, but I suppose there was KSN's kind of input as well. As really what we're finding there is the more homes that were delivered, so if you go from 30 to 50 or to 70, you can get like 10%, up to 10% of cost saving. And then really, obviously, with the constructability of it and sort of program aspect, not only are you saving on time, but it's also a much safer working environment as well. And you know, the MRIAI is doing research on modular construction as well, and they're finding this. A lot of components in the industry, from what I understand, is actually moving in this way as well, because you can guarantee precision and accuracy. So we want to kind of, as architects, take ownership of that process and actually say, well, how do we, you know, allow design to kind of be factored in there as opposed to just efficiency.
Cormac, we're just running a little late. If you want to wrap up there.
Yeah, please. Last image. Thanks, Stephen. So yeah, just to end on that, I suppose that's the exhibition as it was, with the sort of models and the designed by Podium and presentation models, and you can kind of see there it's probably worthy of other images, but I think you saw it in some of Nathalie's as well. It's the idea of that sort of play area with the 3D printed modules there and kind of wrapped our exhibit around there. But yeah, I think we'll probably leave it there and hand over to Emmet. Thanks.
Thanks a million, Cormac and Derek. Very happy to have you both with us. So we'll move on now to our last speaker, Emmet Walsh. Emmet is a practicing architect who has worked in various practices in Melbourne, London, and Dublin. Currently the director of EWA Architects, a practice that specializes in housing and refurbishment projects. EWA were a participant in the Housing Unlocked exhibition with their project, The Working Home, aimed at addressing the challenges of housing and vacant shops in rural areas. So Emmet, if you would like to share your screen there, and we should have a few minutes at the end for some comments. I see some coming in from Paul Leach there, so we'll get to those as soon as Emmet's finished. So Emmet, take it away.
That's great, Stephen. Thanks very much. Let me just put this here. Thanks very much, Stephen, for the invitation, and to Nathalie as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of the exhibition. I think when we saw the call out, it was something we were very excited to be part of. So there was lots of really good ideas submitted to the exhibition, so we were really delighted to be included. Our proposal was probably one of the smaller ones. It was entitled The Working Home, and it was really looking at vacant shops and how they could potentially be used for housing. So when we looked at what we wanted to do for the exhibition, our interests at the time were really around this issue around vacancy, which is well documented. Everyone is kind of familiar with the high rates of vacancy nationally. But also the commercial vacancy rates, which are quite high as well. So we looked at potentially 8,000 commercial vacant shops nationally that could potentially be used for housing. So one of the towns that we just looked at as part of the project was Carlow. So for anyone not familiar with Carlow, it's sort of orientated on an axis of Dublin Street and Tullow Street. And you can see all the black buildings are the vacant buildings within the town. So it's kind of you can see even at 20%, which is high, but not as high as some other towns, which are nearer 50%. Is quite a big problem in town centres. So, and you can kind of see that reflected on the street and the kind of urban situation. So. I suppose we looked at one building on Dublin Street. We were introduced with the County Council down in Carlow, and this was a kind of vision of what our aspiration for town centres should really be. It should be wider footpaths. It should be public seating, landscaping. Should be the removal of car parking spaces, opening up bike lanes, and independent retail, which is sort of a key component of our Working Home proposal. So essentially the Working Home, it's a sort of simple idea. It was based on the benefits of reclaiming the ground floor space in some of these commercial spaces. So there's a lot of different issues that we have when we try and look at some of these buildings, but by reclaiming the ground floor space, we can actually help unlock and develop projects that are more viable, that potentially have more family-friendly accommodation, more wheelchair-friendly accommodation, and have some of less compliance issues around fire safety, because you're not compartmentalizing between commercial and residential. So the Working Home essentially takes a small sort of studio type space and puts it at the front of the street and maintains the active street frontage, but then reclaims a lot of the building back as a home. So so this drawing was really just looking at all of the kind of interventions you might need to make to bring a building like that back into use, and just looking at the relationship between what would be this commercial space on the ground floor and the huge potential that would be there if you kind of reclaim the ground floor space as residential, and the possibilities to really open up the building. You're obviously dealing with, as you're looking at the front, then that's the commercial space, which is really about 2.7 meters by about 4 meters, which doesn't seem like a lot, but for smaller independent retail, it could be something that's quite useful. And you're kind of suggesting that you're trying to take the people who may be working at home already, working hybrid, who might be in garden sheds or attic spaces, and bringing them onto the street, using that as a sort of way of activating the street frontage. So it was really just looking at the potential of some of these buildings. They don't have, they do have a lot of structural issues, a lot of them. They do have a lot of problems with dealing with older buildings. But as you go up into these buildings, there's amazing rooms, there's great spaces, and huge potential for accommodation that's based within the town centres. So I suppose this was a mock shop front that we did for the exhibition, and Nathalie touched upon the housing agency as a sponsor, and some of the engagement that they've had post the exhibition. So they started their own initiative called Making It Happen. So we had some initial meetings with county councils about how this might be implemented, and we're hopeful that maybe one of those goes ahead. Another initiative that the housing agency submitted was a potential amendment to the national planning framework. So there was a submission to the planning advisory forum as potentially this working home model as a different designation, so that it's not just a residential, commercial, there might be a working home designation, and there might be certain benefits within that working home designation. I suppose the big change then since the exhibition has taken place is really the Croí grants. So when we did the proposal back 2021, at the start of 2021, it was the grants weren't in place, but we're certainly finding that a lot more interest in taking on some of these kinds of buildings, and a lot more initiative. There's been over 2,000 approved applications through the grant scheme. So positive news, and definitely a sort of change there, that there's more of an interest in sort of doing something about the issue of vacancy in towns. So that's it, Stephen. Just shorter, but leaves room for maybe some questions.
That's perfect, Emmet. Thanks a million for that, and thanks in particular for giving us a little update on what's been happening since the exhibition. It's very encouraging to hear that about the Croí grants being so well subscribed, and also your discussions with county council. So I hope we can see some more developments in the near future. And carrying on from the theme of development since the exhibition, I just see a question from Paul Leach here in the chat for O'Mahony Pike, which I might go to first. Has there been any talk of a prototype pilot cluster of your proposal, Cormac and Derek, or any? Have you given it any thought, or has anyone been interested in doing that?
Yeah, there has. One of our developer clients hasn't got a huge amount of momentum, but certainly interested in testing the typology at a smaller scale on a kind of edge of town site. So that's interesting. I think the timing also of ours was kind of fed into the new sustainable compact settlement guidelines that the government and the OMP helped inform that document with the department. So we are in one of our other projects looking at it in a more of a walk-up type format, where there's a duplex above a duplex, and we're looking at 3D timber, mass timber production for the upper level units. It's on a sloping site, so a kind of an iteration or a version of that as well is emerging on another development, as I say, dovetailing with the new compact settlement guidance. So yeah, it's certainly being nudged along slowly.
Okay, that's good to hear. Well, just having a look at the questions that have come in. Another one from Paul. who says he was happy to speak at the series of events along with Rory Hearn on December 8th. Paul's opinion is that housing in Ireland is in the grip of late-stage metastasized capitalism, including the forthcoming Planning and Development Bill currently at committee stage in the Oireachtas. So this really touches on the sort of crisis, I suppose, that the Housing Unlocked competition sought to address. And would any of the panelists have any comments on Paul's assessment of the housing situation, or perhaps any thoughts on the bill, if you're familiar with it, or what might we need to do to even coupling up with Philip Jackson's question here, what might we need to do to make some of these policies proceed? We've touched on that already, but any comments from the panel on those two questions?
Stephen.
Yes,
Hi,
Nathalie.
can you hear me? Hi, I have a comment, and I do. There are great questions, and I do absolutely remember Paul and Rory speaking at one of the events in there, and it was great, and it was exactly the type of conversations that we wanted to have in that space. And you know, like something like over this course of the exhibition, and what it was intending to do was to bring everybody into that space, and over about 25,000 people actually came in to see that exhibition. And there were so many events, as I said before, and all of these really important subjects were discussed. And even just to get to Philip's question, Philip Jackson, it's like it's actually amazing what's been going on behind the scenes. We're hearing from Emmet and OMB and others to try and push forward these new ideas, because we always said that housing is very complicated. It's an issue that's systemic. You know, architecture isn't the problem, but it could actually provide some of the solutions. So it was literally, if you could think about, the whole initiative was about getting people together to talk about those things. And it was never going to, you know, we weren't going to finish the exhibition and everything would be solved. But like continuing these conversations and figuring out ways of doing it, which people are doing in the background anyway, is really, really important. And I know that the IEF is continuing to work with the housing agency to you know, continue this with this momentum. And you know, it goes, and it's very important to keep doing that. I mean, that's the only comment I make. And I remember like the emotion that happened in the rooms in many instances through Housing Unlocked. And it's not like, oh yeah, let's just walk away from it now, it's done, we did housing. No, we haven't, obviously, but we've done a lot actually, you know, since the exhibition opened.
Yes, and I think Noelle in the housing agency is also doing her best to proceed with some of these ideas and to push them forward. So it's very much a work in progress, I think, the Housing Unlocked competition and exhibition. So hopefully plenty to look forward to. Just before we wrap up, it's coming up to 2 o'clock. Any more comments or questions from the floor? If anyone wants to just put their hand up or maybe make a contribution, you're very welcome to. And otherwise, we might wrap up at this stage. Okay, so thanks again to our speakers, Emmet, Cormac, Derek, and Nathalie, for joining us. Thanks to Anna for assisting me in hosting this, and thanks to everyone for joining us again on the call. This session will be uploaded to the Centre for Irish Towns YouTube channel, where you can see all previous sessions of the series. Just to remind you for your diaries, there's a session on the 18th of April on urban heritage, and on the 9th of May on Town Centre First, Urban Heritage, hosted by Anna, and the Town Centre First session hosted by my colleague in UCD, Dr. Miriam Fitzpatrick. So I hope you can all make it for those sessions, and then we'll have another series in the autumn. So thanks again, everybody, for coming, and have a very nice afternoon. Thank you.